Hey folks, when Dragon Age the Veilguard came out to, shall we say, less than great reception, I saw many people say that they were returning to Origins instead, and having never played it, I decided to try it out. But I wasn't expecting the gloriously crafted adventure that awaited me in the lands of Ferelden and beyond, so here is my experience with Dragon Age Origins and all of its DLC. Unfortunately, I have to start this video off with a couple of issues. As I'm sure anyone who has played Origins on Steam will tell you, the game does not run well. Without mods, crashes are really frequent and you're pretty much required to download a patch to play the game. Luckily, the 4 GB patch made a huge difference for me and vastly improved my experience, and I had no issues after installing it. The other issue I want to mention is it's kind of my own fault. I think I managed to choose one of the least interesting backstories coupled with the least interesting class, that being the Dalish Elf and Archer Rogue. The problem with playing the Archer is that the skills that you get just they're not very interesting at all. All of them just involve shooting a single arrow, and sometimes that arrow does this effect and sometimes it does this effect, but ultimately it just comes down to just shooting arrows, and it's just not very interesting at all. And every time you use this skill, it significantly slows your rate of fire, and your archer takes a million years to shoot that next arrow, even though they were shooting all the other arrows fine before, so it doesn't really make a difference, you would think. But yeah, it didn't really enjoy it very much. Due to this, quite early on in my playthrough, I started playing as other characters. In fact, I played pretty much exclusively as Morrigan, who I had much more fun with, and pretty much ignored my other character outside of just using them for conversations. I didn't even have my character learn to unlock chests like a good rogue should be able to do. So for the majority of the game, I was just missing out on chests and had no way of opening them with my standard party. The backstories are a great way of introducing you into the world and provides you with a great amount of world building, not too much, but enough to get you started, and they give you lots of opportunities to establish your character through roleplay. The Daily Shelf backstory that I went with, I think, is one of the weaker ones for sure. I think that's due to the fact that the elves are just way less interesting than dwarfs, for example, because the part of the elves' kind of backstory in Dragon Age is that they have no backstory, and that they're trying to learn their history and their lore behind themselves again. But unfortunately, like, it kind of just makes it so that by design it kind of feels lacking compared to the dwarves, who have such a rich lore and interesting society and backstory to them. The Dale Shelf backstory is improved by the Witch Hunt DLC, which adds a little bit of context and extra parts on, as to like things like what the strange mirror is that you encounter, and it definitely helped me feel a lot more satisfied by my choice towards the end of the game. Ostagar makes for a good opening area, as there's lots of people to talk to and learn about the game and get a greater understanding of the world that you're in. And you can see a lot of things going on, and the wilds are a good way to introduce you to the more open-ended areas that the game has, giving you lots of access to quests that you can hunt down and find that you wouldn't normally encounter unless you're really looking for them. In particular, I enjoyed talking to Wynne and the Tranquil, who shared things about the Fade and mages. If you haven't played the game before, the Fade is a world where people go where they dream, and it's inhabited by spirits and demons. The demons are always looking for ways into our world from the Fade by taking over the bodies of mages and making them into abominations. This features a few times in the game, and I really enjoyed the idea of magic being connected to a dream world and demons. And I just loved this element of the game lore because it connected so many aspects of the world, like the Chantry, which is the main religion of Ferelden, the Templars that serve the Chantry, mages, demons, and having these things all be connected really helped the game feel whole and well thought out. The Tranquils, on the other hand, were barely explored at all in the game. We learn what they are, and we get to talk to a couple of them. Depending on what backstory you choose, you might talk to a few more. But I would have liked for them to play a bigger role in some way, either through a quest line, or perhaps one of our companions being a Tranquil and being able to offer that unique, non-emotional perspective. While at Ostagar, we learn about the Grey Wardens and the Darkspawn. The Darkspawn are the main enemies of the game, and they take various forms, which we find out later are based off of which race they corrupt. When the Darkspawn corrupts an old god, that god becomes an archdemon and a blight begins. The blight is basically an invasion of the Darkspawn, and it acts as the main driving force of the plot. But I found the Blight to take a bit too much of a backseat after Ostagar, as we're allowed to kind of roam around for a very long time over a great distance of Ferelden, and it kind of feels like you run into Darkspawn sort of here and there, and they play a bigger part in some parts of the world, like for instance the Dwarf area, but around the Elfin area you don't really run into any at all. So the Blight manages to simultaneously feel like a threat that people talk about often, and also something that isn't really part of the game, at least for some parts of the game. The Grey Wardens using Darkspawn blood is a pretty crazy idea. Like, I don't know who thought that drinking corrupted Darkspawn blood would be a good idea, but it seems to have worked out well for them for the past few blights, so I guess, you gotta use what you got. The Grey Wardens are cool though. The fact that they are just an army made up of all of the different races, and they just take the strongest warriors with the goal of defeating the Darkspawn. It's a really compelling idea, and it's something that you really want to be a part of. Eventually, the Darkspawn attack Ostagar, and we're betrayed by Loghain, who becomes the antagonist of the game. The betrayal is pretty wild, and I didn't expect such a character who was introduced as this great general to turn tail and run, but it turned out to be a move for power, and the Wardens end up framed for his crimes. Loghain makes for a good antagonist, but he plays a very small role in the game, only really showing up a few times over the course of the playthrough, and most of the times are in cutscenes where he's not even in the same room as you, he's just off somewhere else, and you're off in a different place, and you're just kind of seeing what's going on with him. It's just kind of, what's going on with Loghain, and then suddenly you're just back and doing your own thing, and then it's not really important for the next few hours of gameplay again. Throughout the rest of the story, you travel around the various locations of the map, gathering allies to help fight the Darkspawn. In the Brazilian forest, you help the Dalish with a werewolf situation and help solve that curse. You help the dwarfs at Orzammar choose a new king. You help the Circle of Magi at their tower with blood mages and abominations, and you help Redcliffe's humans with an undead invasion and another abomination. And then you venture out to find a religious relic called the Urn of Sacred Ashes before calling a landsmeet and determining the fate of Loghain and the realm. For those who have played before, I'll quickly mention the decisions I made in these quests. If you haven't played before, if you plan on playing the game soon, then maybe skip this section. For the elves, I chose to side with the Lady of the Forest and help the werewolves break free of their curse. The fight with the wolves versus Zathrian had a lot going on and it was really enjoyable. With the dwarfs, I made a decision quite quick to go with Haramont, since Balin's men kill someone pretty much as soon as you enter Orzammar, and the previous kin apparently endorsed him, and that was pretty much enough for me. I also chose to destroy the anvil as it seemed far too dangerous to keep around. I think Orzammar was my favourite area of the game, and as I previously mentioned, the dwarves have a very interesting society in the world of Dragon Age with their system of paragons and castes, so I found them really interesting, and I just loved that area so much. At Redcliffe, after helping save the town, I chose to use blood magic on Connor, mainly due to the fact that his mother volunteered and I found her quite annoying. This was the first location I went in my playthrough, and had I known more about blood magic before going here, I probably wouldn't have chosen this option and would have gone with the mages instead. But honestly, it's Connor's mother's fault for being so annoying. After finding the ashes, I decided to let Genitivi tell people, although I'd rather he didn't, but there isn't actually an option to stop him from doing that without killing him. So I ended up just letting him do what he wanted. The area all around the ashes was one of my favourites, and fighting through the dragons and the cult was pretty great, and even the puzzles were good, even though I had to look up that bridge puzzle. At the mage tower, I chose to save the mages and not help with the annulment, because it's basically just mage genocide and I wasn't interested in that. Entering the Fade was a cool idea, but I'm not sure how I felt about the gameplay of this section. Changing forms was pretty cool, but going through all the portals just took a little bit too long, and I think this section could easily have been cut in half and it would have been far better for it. When I reached the landsmeet, I decided to try and marry Alistair to the Queen and have him be king, but unfortunately it didn't work out that way, so I let Alistair reign alone. He did protest to this, of course. He always said he never wanted to be king, but I felt that he would be a better candidate as the Queen seemed a bit too smart for her own good and she was quite scheming. I knew that my character would be backing Alistair up as his Chancellor anyway, so I wasn't too worried. I was almost convinced to allow Loghain to become a Grey Warden. It did make a lot of sense to me at the time. However, knowing that Alistair would leave as a result left me with no choice but to kill him. After the landsmeet, the Darkspawn go to Denerim. They kind of do a little switcheroo. We basically go to Redcliffe, and then we get to Redcliffe, and it's like, well, actually, they're going to Denerim. It's like, okay, I mean, I kind of feel like we could have just left that part out of the game, but whatever. Just to have me travel back and forth for no reason, that's cool. So they end up invading Denerim, and when I went there, we learn about the requirement of a warden having to die so that the archdemon can't possess another darkspawn and stay alive. Morrigan came to me with a proposal that she would get pregnant and use our child to take on the darkspawn taint. This is definitely one of the wildest things I've ever seen possible in a game before, but I mean, how can you say no to that? In the end, we defend Denerim from the Darkspawn and defeat the Archdemon, and Morgan ends up disappearing until we find her later on in the Witch Hunt DLC. The characters really make this game. Alistair and Morgan are beloved for a good reason. They have really fun personalities, and they aren't just yes men that will agree to everything you do. The chances are you'll upset them at least once or twice over the course of your playthrough. They're really fun to talk to and just have around as they have their conversations as you go through the world. They're a perfect mix of sassy and sarcastic, and yeah, you can't ask for better party members than them. Alistair's companion quest wasn't that great though, and I think I would have preferred them to focus on his Templar past for this quest, as his family is more tied to the main story anyway, so going to visit his sister didn't really feel like enough of a departure from that, and it just wasn't really that interesting overall. I managed to accidentally romance Morgan. I think I had the same issue in Mass Effect 1 where I romanced Liara without even meaning to. I think if you're just nice to them, the game assumes that you want to be in a relationship, but I guess the lack of formal acknowledgement of partnership makes it feel more natural, even if it's not what I intended for my character. Her companion quest was definitely the best. Learning about her mother's plan and going to kill Flemeth was a huge moment, and fighting that huge dragon outside of that little hut was pretty awesome. I like that you can have a dog, but I didn't really see the point, as it wouldn't really add much to conversations, which are the main draw of these BioWare titles for me. But the Mabari Hounds have some decent lore, and they're actually pretty cool. Liliana was actually a good character, but unfortunately it took me too long to realize that, as I thought she was just going to be the classic religious sort of goody two-shoes character. But had I known her backstory sooner, I probably would have had her in my party more, especially since I failed to make my rogue good at unlocking chests. But I ended up pretty much ignoring her all game. Sten was my personal favorite. It was hard to understand him at first because he never really talks much and doesn't really like answering your questions, but I'm really glad that I stuck with him because learning about his people, the Qunari, it felt earned, and the respect that he eventually has for you is very rewarding. Ogren came a little too late in the game for me to be interested in adding him to my party, and he served a similar role to Sten, who was my primary tank. So I just used him for the required sections in both Origins and Awakening. But from what I learned from having him, I had him slightly longer when I played through Awakening, and I didn't really like his personality. I didn't vibe with him very much, so I'm quite glad that I didn't end up using him. Wynn became a mainstay for me primarily because she was a healer, but I came to actually enjoy her character as well, as having an older, wiser person around felt quite valuable. Although she was a bit judgmental and boomer-like at times, particularly towards Morrigan, her story with the spirit added a lot of value to the game, as it adds another dimension to the lore of the Fade and the good spirits that also live there. Shale seemed like she would be fun to use in combat, and she had a fun personality to match, but again, I didn't use them much as I assumed she would just be a tank. But upon looking at her abilities a little later on, I realized that she can kind of fit any role, but I'm not sure how good she is at doing that. She's perhaps more of a jack of all trades, master of none. But this character, along with Liliana, is one that I definitely regret not using more. And finally there's Zevran, who was the only companion I chose not to add to my party. I simply didn't trust him and was surprised it wasn't even an option to bring him along or not, as that's something you would never get in newer games, as most likely it would just be forced upon you. I think that for that reason I expected him to show up again at some point, even though I declined him, but no, he never turns up again. You decline him and that's it. You never see him again for the rest of the game. Overall, the characters were extremely well written, they had fun personalities, and they offered different perspectives on the events of the game, which really helped to round out the narrative and make the characters feel like real people with complex emotions and motivations. The voice acting complements this extremely well and was brilliantly well done. The gameplay does suffer from being quite old, but not anywhere near as much as I expected, especially near the end of the game when you have a bunch of powerful skills in your arsenal. Your allies' AI is not good, and they struggle to use their skills well. The tactic system does help somewhat with this, but I found that some of the more complex abilities, the AI had absolutely no way of using it on its own. So you have to micromanage the party for very specific skills, which is fine, but I would have preferred them to be able to handle more things by themselves, but again, the game is pretty old. The enemy variety is very good, especially among Darkspawn, who will have mages and alpha hurlocks and archers, and they'll kind of have like their own specialists as well, like shapeshifters. The combat has a good amount of challenge to it, particularly that first ogre fight in the tower, which is pretty tough actually for that point in the game. I did end up turning down the difficulty, but this was mainly due to the fact that I wanted to use AoE spells without hurting my party members. This is something that I'm firmly against in games, as particularly with magic, you should be able to avoid damaging allies. I'm always an advocate for games forsaking realism for the sake of fun, and having huge AoE spells and abilities damage my allies makes me not want to use them, and that takes away a lot of the fun for me. So I ended up playing on the easiest difficulty for most of the game. It didn't affect my enjoyment at all, since the combat wasn't really the focus of the game, at least in games like these. For me, I'm far more interested in the conversations, decisions, and following the story. The decisions that you do make in the game felt like they had a huge effect on the world and how the story plays out, and I had real trouble with some of the more morally tasking questions like the one with Connor, and with the architect in the DLC. And speaking of the DLC, I had some mixed thoughts on them. Some of them were very good and others were a bit disappointing. We'll start with the disappointing ones, the first of which was the Blight DLC where you play as the Darkspawn. It's a great idea for a DLC, but the biggest thing that I was disappointed with was the fact that you don't get to play as the Archdemon at the end, which I was really expecting when I was kind of building up to that. I think it would have been way more fun than what you got, but instead you just fight with the same Darkspawn party that you used to reach the final battle, so I was quite disappointed by that. The DLC did offer some insight into the mind of the Darkspawn, and it seems that they have some kind of hive mind with the Archdemon, and they will kill their own that they deem too weak, so that was good. Return to Ostagar was fine for what it was, but ultimately outside of seeing the fate of the king and getting some nice equipment, it didn't really add much for me. Stone Prisoner was a short adventure, but there just wasn't really a lot to it, and it just serves to add shale to the party, so not good but not bad. But I think it would have been more interesting had I made different decisions when talking to the demon cat, but I simply attacked it, so didn't really have much opportunity for exploration there. As for the better DLCs, Liliana's DLC, as I mentioned, it was a main factor in making me regret not using her more in the base game. Her personality seems to shine a lot more here, and playing as her made me wish that my character was a two-handed rogue instead of the archer, as the backstabbing gameplay made combat much more dynamic since you have to be aware of your positioning. And the melee skills for rogue are far more interesting than the ranged ones, at least until Awakening. Seeing her background story gave interesting insight into the bards of Orlais and the dangerous character that was Marjolaine. The first area of the DLC isn't that interesting, but the castle heist is much better, and I really enjoyed that section of the DLC a lot. Warden's Keep had a whole castle to explore and learn about, and the decisions that you make within it regarding the demons and the Grey Warden are tempting but morally questionable, which I enjoyed a lot. Ultimately, I chose to reject the demon's deal, fearing that the demon possessing Sophia was far more dangerous than the rest of the demons. I also allowed Avernus to continue his research, but hopefully in a more humane way so that he might be able to help us with the Blight. But this never ended up coming to fruition, and he doesn't take part in the story after Dragon's Peak. Golems of Amgarak sees us return to the Deep Roads in search of lost knowledge of golem creation. I spent most of this playing as the golem, which was by far the most interesting character from a combat perspective, as you can make it really OP with all of the buffs that you find. The Harvester was a weird but horrifying enemy, and the atmosphere of the DLC was really well done. The Illyrian puzzles were relatively simple but engaging, and despite the amount of backtracking that you had to do, I enjoyed them quite a lot. Witch Hunt continued both my Dalish elf background and the ending that I had with Morrigan, so it was a pretty significant DLC for my character, as it tied both the beginning of my elf's journey and the end together. It answered questions from both parts of the game as well, so it served as a great way to end off the main plot, but I would have liked the child to at least make an appearance instead of only be mentioned, as it kind of felt like this entity that didn't really exist and you never really know what happens to it. Awakening was the largest DLC and is kind of like its own little game, to be honest. There's lots to do and there's a whole new map to explore and new characters to meet. The DLC is really well done, and it manages to make the game feel fresh enough with all the new additions that even though I had a significant number of hours played by this point, I was still keen to play every chance I got. The new skills added for archers were very welcome, as they added something new to the class and actually made me use my character for this part of the game, even though the other party members had some cool spells as well. I ended up using Justice, Anders, and Valana for my playthrough, although I think I would have used Mary if she had survived the joining. The Black Marsh area was my favourite part, as the dragon and the Baroness fights there were really cool, and they carried a great story as well. I also enjoyed Nathaniel Howe being a character here, but I didn't trust him enough, similar to Zavrin, to let him join me initially. But I did feel bad that his family was suffering for the acts of his father, so He did come back at some point and eventually asked to join the party again, and I let him. The idea of the Darkspawn becoming sentient and removing themselves from the cycle of blights was a fantastic idea, and the choice that the Architect presents you with is the choice that I struggled with the most across the entire base game and the DLCs, is being able to side with them and use Warden Blood to break the Darkspawn from the cycle was such an interesting idea, and I feel like there could have been a lot that could have come about as a result of that. But unfortunately, I ended up just deciding to kill him. Well, not really unfortunately, I guess it was my own decision, but I decided to kill him because there was too many unknowns, and he definitely seemed like he was hiding things from us and manipulating the situation, and he did also kidnap us, so he's not exactly a really good guy. I ended up killing the mother as well, and I don't think that's a choice. You don't get to not kill the mother, but that's why I did. And both of the fights against the Architect and the Mother were really good, and especially the Mother's, it was really kind of intense with all of her children joining her. And that was it. That was my experience with Dragon Age Origins. I'm really glad to have finally played it, and I now understand why it's so beloved and recommended. I will be continuing the series by playing Dragon Age 2 and Inquisition, so subscribe if you want to see that, and thanks for watching.